Hi, everybody. Welcome. We are going to, you know, hang out here for just a minute while we let folks trickle in from the waiting room. I'm so excited to have you all here. We're going to get started in just a minute, but seeing some folks coming on in from that waiting room, so I want to make sure we don't get right into it until we have our audience in place. So thank you for being here. Thank you for spending your Tuesday, either late morning or early afternoon with us. I know it is midterm season for a lot of folks, and we are in fall recruitment mode. So really appreciate you taking the time. I am seeing my clock reading 11:31 Pacific, which means I will go ahead and get us started here. Hi, everybody. I'm Brinton Botkin. I use she, her pronouns, and I work on the student marketing team here at Handshake, which means I get to host many lovely career events, but one of my favorites is this standing virtual office hours with Christine. I'm just going to do some quick level setting here. This is a Q&A format session, so please use the Q&A box throughout the session to submit your questions around career planning for Christine, and we will get to as many as we can before we wrap. These events are intended to give folks a chance to ask their burning career questions and receive expert advice from someone who has coached many, many, many people in their careers and now hears directly from employers and folks making hiring decisions all the time about what they are looking for in early talent. So with that, Christine, can you go ahead and introduce yourself and maybe give a bit of background on you and what you're working on at Handshake today?
Sure, happy to be here. Good to see all of you. Excited to get some of your questions. Feel free to start popping those into the Q&A while I introduce myself so that we can jump right into that. I am the Chief Education Strategy Officer here at Handshake, which essentially means I get to work with all of your amazing universities and colleges. So we partner with over 1,500 universities and colleges across the nation, and myself and my team work really hard to partner with all of them to support you in helping you get started in your internship and your first job, for some of you, your second or third jobs. And prior to this, I spent the whole first decade of my career working in higher education, running different career services offices at 4 different institutions up and down the East Coast. So I have literally advised thousands of students on how to get their first job. So excited to be here today and to answer some of the questions you have.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Christine. I think a really great thing to start with is, we have a couple of questions that have just come in actually. And so I'm looking to make sure. Okay. This question I think is really interesting from like a larger philosophical perspective as we get into the tactics of career planning. Um, so this question is, I want to find purpose in life in terms of what kind of career I should pursue. However, in order to choose that right fit, you need to explore a lot of options, which isn't always practical, is it? So do you have any kind of advice for somebody who's starting to think through just the broader career exploration process and where they might find a fit for their life and kind of their goals?
Yeah, for sure. So there are a few different things that you can do. I'll name some both more abstract ideas of what you can be thinking about, but also some practical tips that you can take. So the first thing I would actually just caution you to remember is that your life is really long. You have many, many working years, and the reality is you can have multiple careers in that time frame. So you don't have to decide on one thing and then stick to that one thing from 20 to 65. You can do many things in between. And you'd be surprised how many things might seem kind of different, but actually they end up complementing each other in different ways, right? So you all heard in my intro, I started in higher education, started working in student affairs, worked in career services. Now I work for a tech company. For some people, they'd be like, that's a huge pivot, totally different. But for me, it actually feels like it marries many of my interests together. And no doubt it was a difference. It was a pivot. It was a change. And I had to learn a lot of new things. But I'm also getting a chance to still use a lot of my subject matter expertise in what I do. So that being said, just take a little bit of the pressure off. You don't have to come down to just one thing that you want to do. You can have multiple interests. You can have multiple areas that you want to pursue. Ways to think about how to find that. So one is I would literally make a list of all of the things that you're interested in. And then I would make a list at what are you actually good at? And then I would make a list of what are some things that you feel like the world needs? right? Problems that need solving, maybe things in your community that need done, so on and so forth. And then what you're looking for is you want to look at all three lists and you essentially want to circle like the themes and areas where you can bring them together, right? Those become areas that you want to further explore and see, okay, could there be a career in this? Could there be a job in this? Likely the answer is yes. Like there are literally thousands of jobs and thousands of roles out there. And so regardless of what it is you're interested in, I'm positive there is likely to be something. You should also make a list of your values. And there are different, you can actually go online and you can look at some values card sort type activities, or you can even buy values cards and like send them to your house. And you could do this exercise with like a good friend. But essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to narrow down to what are your top 3 values. And those values may change a little bit depending on the period of life you are in. Your values in your early 20s might look a little different than your values in your 30s, which might look different in your 40s or 50s, and that's okay. But the point being is you then also want to be clear about that because let's say, for example, your value is I do need to make a good chunk of money because I have loans to pay back and I need to support my family, right? And that's a value that you have. And so if that's the case, then you might have to look at careers that fit around the categories that you just talked about that also bring you enough of a salary that you'd be able to support yourself, pay your bills, support your family, right? So having some clarity around those pieces are all really useful. For those of you that are still in school, so I hope that the student who's asking this question might still be in college or university. If you have not already gone to your career center, they are a great place to start this conversation because they can actually literally facilitate and guide you through this process as well. So that's another option too, is to do that.
And I think that you and this extremely comprehensive and helpful answer that I'm like, man, where was Christine in my life when I was making my career decisions? You're such a good example of the value of career services and the level of depth and support that you can get from a career services professional. So absolutely advise you to go onto Handshake, make an appointment with your career services center if you think you would benefit from it. One of the things that you said in your answer, Christine, talking about your background and how you've pivoted and how life is really long, is actually something I'm seeing reflected in a couple of the questions that I'm seeing around career pivots. So, do you have any advice for somebody who is looking to tailor their resume for a career pivot? Somebody who might not necessarily be wanting to pursue a further career in the area where they've had professional experience or maybe their academic background aligns to.
Yeah, for sure. The most important thing you can do if you're thinking about a pivot is to actually talk to people who are in the area that you want to pivot into. And the reason I say this is because what you're going to want to do with your resume or in your interview or on your Handshake profile, for example, is you want to use the right jargon and the right words that illustrate what you've done in the past, but you're framing it with the language that your new industry or your new sector, your new role uses. And there's no better way to really refine that than to actually talk to a lot of people who are in that role. So I'll just use myself as an example. If I was in education, there's a whole set of jargon that I use there. And now I'm in tech. And so if you were looking at moving from education to tech, you need to talk to people who are actually in tech and in the types of functions that you're looking at so that you can start to hear, okay, are they using the word customer or do they use the word client? They're using a term called book of business. What does that mean? They're using these acronyms like ARR or ACV. What does that stand for, right? Like you want to try and understand what those things are because then you're going to try and work your way backwards to what it is you've done. And you're going to reframe your experiences with that jargon so that you, one, sound like you know what you're talking about. And two, it is actually easier to bridge the gap between what you've done previously and what you're trying to do because you're not making the person that you want to hire you do the work. You're doing that work for them and you're showing them how it's relevant. So that's going to be really, really important. The second reason you want to really talk to a lot of people is because, quite frankly, in a competitive job market, people are typically going to go towards folks that have direct experience in that area. And if you want someone to take a chance on you, they are often going to need to know more than just your skills around why they want to take a chance on you. And so meeting you, getting to talk to you, seeing how sharp you are and the way that you ask your questions and the way you respond to them, that all makes a difference in whether or not someone is going to want to take that chance. So get on Handshake, use the people search feature, start reaching out to peers and alumni. You have access to the entire Handshake network. Take advantage of that and reach out to folks. Also, don't get discouraged. I find that a lot of times when people are networking, if they don't hear back from the first few people that they reach out to, they get really discouraged and they stop. It's important to know that when you're reaching out to folks, for every 10 people that you reach out to, you might only hear back from 50% of them, right? So for every 10, you might hear from 5. For every 5, you might actually set up a meeting with like 3. Okay. And out of those 3, you might have found 1 or 2 that you might continue a conversation with. So every single person you reach out to does not need to become your best friend. And I think that's also an important like mindset to have as you go into it. You're just going to learn and get great advice.
I love that. And your example of yourself coming from academia and higher ed into tech is directly applicable to the person who asked the question. So really great, really great example there. I would love to pivot a little bit from what we've done in these past sessions and get into some like interview advice here.
Yeah,
So can you talk through, maybe some of the examples that somebody in a first job interview might encounter and maybe give some examples for how you would think through your answers to the questions. Why are you interested in this job? And if you have questions for the interviewer. So do you have any questions for me? So that's a
sure.
long combination of several questions, but maybe you can talk through first some of the common interview questions for somebody in their first job.
Sure, sure. Why you're interested in this job is definitely a common question. Tell me about yourself is almost always a question that you're going to get from somebody in the interview process. Someone may also ask you things. Actually, let me group all of these together into like a behavioral set of questions. So behavioral questions are questions that typically start with, tell me a time when, tell me when you've done blank. And they're essentially looking for you to use a previous example to illustrate what your behavior was in that previous situation, because they believe that that is often how you're going to apply or deal with another similar type situation. So if somebody says, tell me a time when you had to manage conflict within a group, that's an example of a behavioral question. Or if someone says something like, tell me a time when you really used your leadership skills, that's a behavioral question. And what they're looking for is a very specific previous situation as an example to kind of walk them through that. If you get a behavioral question, you want to use the STAR method. So if you're not familiar with the STAR method, write this down. STAR stands for S, situation. What was the situation that you had? T stands for task. What were you trying to do in that situation? A stands for actions. What actions did you take to resolve that task or the situation? And R is what were the results, either of the situation or perhaps what you learned from that situation. If you follow that format, just know that often people spend too much time telling me the S and the T. It's a lot of time on setup, and they don't spend as much time on the A and the R. Okay, so don't make that same mistake. So if you're prepping for an interview, you can essentially use this format and you can just jot down a sentence or two next to each of the letters. And that's going to keep you organized and like succinct and tight in your answer. If you're wondering what types of behavioral interview questions are people likely to ask you, go to your job description. In the job description, you should be able to read it and pull out for yourself, what are the 3 to 5 major skills that they seem to really be looking for? Is it organization? Is it teamwork? Is it communication? Is it technical skills? Is it analytical skills? Like, what is it that they're really looking for? And no doubt they are likely to ask you 3 to 5 behavioral interview questions based on those skills. And that's what you're going to use to prepare for your interview. Let me jump back to the first 2 questions that you asked. So 1, why are you interested in this job? Typically, what somebody wants to hear is one, an authentic answer, but also they're hoping that your authentic answer is something related to the company and something related to the role itself. It's not good enough often to say, like, well, I'm really interested in working at Handshake because I believe in the mission of Handshake. I mean, cool, 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 great. But we have so many different functions and roles within the company that most of our hiring managers, if they don't hear you distinctly say, but I really want to work in customer success because X, Y, and Z, it's not going to be as compelling as the next person who is going to articulate that. So make sure you articulate both the company reason why, but also the role reason why. And then for the second question of tell me about yourself, you want to keep this answer to about like a minute and a half, 2 minutes tops, no longer. And the whole point here is that you're essentially just trying to give them the major highlights of your life that have led you to why you are here in front of them applying for this job right now. That's it. You're not telling them your life story, right? Unless there is like a poignant piece in your childhood story or your middle school story or your college story that explains why you are in front of them now. So think of what are maybe 2 or 3 at most sort of major things that you want them to know about you that lead you to be sitting in front of them right now. And that is essentially the like, tell me about yourself sort of journey. And then your last question was, what questions should you ask
Yeah.
back
Yeah.
to an employer?
I'm
I
so
always,
impressed that you remembered all of these, by the
oh,
way. I
yeah,
gave you like a
yeah.
really tall stacked sandwich of like many questions and you remembered them all.
No problem, no problem. The ask, okay, so when they ask you if you have questions for them, you should always have questions for them. 100% you should always have questions. So make sure you prepare. You're going to prepare more questions than you will have time to answer. That's okay. And you want to ask different types of questions, and it depends on which part of the process you're in too. Okay, so let me give you some examples. You might want to ask the same question of every single person that you meet with, because it might give you a sense of how consistent people are across the company. So for example, if you asked a question about culture, tell me about how would you describe the culture of this organization? That might be an interesting question for you personally to be like, oh, it's really interesting. So the senior level people seem to describe it this way, but the more junior level people described it this way, or the people in the marketing department described it like this, but the recruiters really described it like this. What does that tell me? Is there inconsistency? Am I okay with that inconsistency? Am I okay with the differences, right? Like there's no right or wrong answer. It's just, what do you make of it? What do you like or don't like about it, right? There are 2 questions that I personally really love asking because I think it gives me a lot of information that matters to how I work. So one question that I like to ask is, um, tell me about some of the unspoken rules in this organization. And for me, that's always interesting because it sheds light on some of the norms in the organization that actually exist, but aren't often written down as the actual like culture or values of the company, right? So for example, I've asked that question here at Handshake. And some of the answers that I've sometimes gotten from people is like, oh, we're like a really heavy doc and deck heavy culture. If you don't write it down, probably not happening, right? Like that's actually a really good thing to know, because if I'm not really into docs and decks, this might not be the right environment for me, for example, right? A second question that I always really like to ask, and I like to ask this of multiple people at different levels, is how are decisions made here? What does that process look like? Who are the typical people that are involved? How quickly does the decision-making process happen? That for me tells me a lot of information around how things are done. Is there a clear process? Is it really actually very relational based? Who are those people? Right? Because that also helps me to be better prepared once I first go into the job of already having identified potentially who are some important influential people that I'm also going to need to meet and build a relationship with as well. So you can ask any of those types of questions. You can ask more specific questions about the job. I always think it's smart when a candidate says, tell me what would success look like for this role in the first 30, 60, 90 days, right? That's always a great question too. And it gives you a sense of whether or not that hiring manager or that team even has a clear picture of what success looks like. Or a question that I always also appreciate hearing from candidates is, what would it look like to, what would it look like if this person really failed at this job? Right? Like flip side to the other question. And sometimes you get a lot of information that way. Or a question around like, tell me, what are the three biggest challenges that really face your organization or face your team going into this year? And how are you thinking about addressing those things? Again, gives you a sense of like, okay, do I want to be focused on those types of things? Are those the types of challenges I want to be working on? Right. So
Yeah.
these are all the different types of things that I think you could get really curious about.
I love it. And speaking of curiosity, we have a lot of questions about networking.
Okay.
And sorry, I feel like you
Oh, this
do
is
these office
great.
hours and I'm like talk for 45 minutes straight. So like thank you so much. So this question, which is also indicative of, not indicative, inclusive of several questions in this flavor, are I know you mentioned networking and reaching out to people to learn more about a career path. How would you approach that and how would you format your outreach to those people?
Sure. So what you would do is you would send an email or send a message via Handshake. And I'm going to use Brinton as an example. So let's say I was interested in doing comms or I was interested in working in marketing. I might reach out to Brinton and say, hi, Brinton, I found you on Handshake. I am a fellow student at blank blank university. I found you because I saw that you had interned at X, or that maybe you major in X or you're part of this type of student organization. Like, doesn't matter, but just like give the person a sense of like why it is you're reaching out to them, like what enticed you about their profile that made you reach out to them. I would really love to hear more about your experience doing blank. Or I would love to hear more about how you've applied your major or your academic background this way. Or I would love to hear about your career path. Again, be specific. You can list maybe like 2 or 3 topics at most that you would like to cover, and then say, could we schedule 20 or 30 minutes to chat at your convenience? Here's my availability for the next 2 weeks. And then I would offer up maybe 3 or 4 times over the course of the next 2 weeks. And I would convert, if I could figure out where Brinton was, if I knew that she was on the West Coast, for example, I would convert those times to Pacific time to also make it easier for her when she looks at this email to essentially, hopefully say, yes, I'm happy to talk to you about that topic. And great, you've already offered me times. I don't have to like write you back and forth to offer you a whole bunch of times, which is also why I say give them some times a couple weeks out, because a lot of people are really busy and they're not going to be able to meet like this week or necessarily even next week. So give them a few options.
Super great reminder to make it as easy as possible for people to help
Right.
you. I want to lean into a question that I think is near and dear to my heart as co-lead of Handshake's employee resource group for folks who are neurodivergent. I have a couple of different versions of this question, actually, which is, do you have any advice for neurodivergent students in terms of streamlining the job search and career development process? Somebody who might be dealing with overwhelm when it comes to transitioning between school and potentially part-time work and navigating the job search process and just feeling overwhelmed by all of the transitions there. And while you answer, I'm going to add something in the chat, which is a recording of a previous event that we did that actually touched on this specifically. So folks
Oh,
can
I love
reach that
that.
resource as well.
I love that. I love that. Okay. First, I want to give the honest caveat that I am not an expert in neurodiversity. And so, what my advice will center on is simply how to chunk things to make it more manageable. And hopefully that will help some in supporting your process. So I think you can look at this a number of different ways. I think if Brinton, based on your example, if what is feeling overwhelming is that you're doing a lot, you have a lot of things on your plate. And so adding the job search on top of school, on top of friends, on top of a part-time job, on top of your homework, right, feels really overwhelming. I would literally sit down and I would start chunking your time and start looking for sort of the moments of where you can prioritize. And sometimes I think what's hardest is when you have to do a lot of context switching. So what that phrase means for anyone that's not familiar with it is like, if I suddenly had to be in a meeting like this one, where I'm giving advice about the job search, and then as soon as I get out of this meeting, I suddenly have to go talk about product things. And then as soon as that's done, I suddenly have to go talk about a whole bunch of finance things. And then I get out of that, and then I suddenly have to go to my kids' soccer practice. And then I suddenly have to like make dinner, right? Like I am context switching constantly, right? So every hour that I essentially just listed for you is something completely different. And my mind has to like completely shift every single time. And so sometimes what's really helpful in managing kind of overwhelm is to actually minimize as much as possible your context switching. Now, I know some of you are like, Christine, I don't have control over all of those pieces. And I completely get that. I don't have full control over all of those pieces either. So what you want to do is you want to try and find the places where you do have control and chunk it as much as possible so that you're not trying to just do little bits here and there, but rather you've got like a chunk of an hour or two or three where you're just focused on things related to like schoolwork. Even if it's not all the same subject, it's school and you're kind of categorizing it as school. Then you've got like a chunk of time where you're like working. You're working. You've got a chunk of time where you just do friend stuff. Do the friend stuff. Don't worry about the other things, right? Then you got a chunk of time where you're doing the job search. So I would think about ways in which you can do essentially, I do this every year at the end of the year. I do a calendar audit. And I essentially try and look and see how can I reorganize my calendar for the next year to minimize as much context switching as possible. I know some students already do this where they're like, I'm going to do classes as much as possible Monday through Wednesday. I'm going to do like the assignments and the work from those classes as much as possible Wednesday through Friday. Right. And so like people have different things in different ways that they like to do it. There's no right answer. It's just whatever works for you. But those are some examples of what I have heard from folks. The other thing too is to just keep in mind that your job search can really be chunked into 4 steps. For those of you that have come to my previous office hours, you've heard me say this before. Don't think of everything that you have to do for the job search as like this million-mile list. It's actually not. It's 4 things. You have to do your documents, right? Resume, cover letter, profile. You have to do your research, macro and micro on the company and industry, or on the industry and trends, and then on the company and role. You have to network, which we've already talked about today. And then you're going to search and apply. That's really it. Those are the 4 things. And once you actually get an interview, then we can talk about the interview process, which we also talked about a bit today. But really, the job search, anything that people are telling you to do can probably fit into one of these 4 categories, which I think just mentally makes it a little bit easier to like wrap your head around.
I love that. For somebody who says you're not an expert, I think you had some really solid tips. And I will put on
Thank
my mental inclusivity and neurodiversity at Handshake ERG co-lead hat and just say
you.
something that's also really helpful for finding that dedicated focus time to maybe checking off one of those tasks or one of those, specific 4 steps in the process, Christine, is finding somebody to body double with, taking that time to work in sometimes in silence with somebody else, but just the accountability of being with somebody to keep you focused and keep you on track is something that really benefits, like, for example, myself and my community. I'm in performance review season. We do body doubling sessions for writing a performance reviews because we know that it's a big task that we need to focus on. So I shared a resource in the chat there for anybody who might benefit from that. But I want to pivot into a couple of other questions. So this one is from a sociology major student who says that they are facing a problem that many social sciences students face or, tend to face, which is the fact that the major is so broad that it's really hard to find a specific career to navigate. And there are no set steps for somebody in such a broad major. This person is wondering if you have any advice for how to find the right career for somebody who focused on social science, and how would you market yourself in a corporate setting?
Yeah. Well, I love that because I was a psych major. So I feel like psychology and sociology are simply cousins of each other. um, I think, to be honest, my first maybe advice would be don't think of it as what is the right career, because there isn't a right career. There is a career. There is the one career that you perhaps first chose to do, but I don't know if there is a right career or not. So really, it's just more about what are your interests and what fits your life right now. And then, and what skills are you gaining from that? And you can always pivot, you can always change. I'm gonna tell you something that I have always rejected ever since I was in your shoes a long time ago. I used to get advice all the time from people in my field that would say, oh, don't do a job in this because it'll pigeonhole you. Don't go into this. This will pigeonhole you. It'll be really hard to get out of X, Y, and Z. And, in my heart of hearts, I just never believed it. And the reason I didn't believe it was because I felt like it was a really lazy way of thinking about it. Because the reality is, you're only as pigeonholed as you allow yourself to be. If you don't want to be pigeonholed, then while you're in that job, make sure you stay connected to the overall industry. Make sure you're still going to industry conferences. Make sure you're still reading up on the trends more broadly. Make sure you're still networking. Make sure you're still meeting people. Like, make sure you're joining different committees in areas that are outside of your functional area, but you're also interested in. Like, there are a million different ways that you can answer this problem that don't require you to get pigeonholed. And the reality is, like, I've never been pigeonholed either. And so I think I think you can either have a limiting mindset or you can have an expansive mindset. And I would invite everybody on this call to make a decision when you get out of this hour session that you're here with us, and decide, I'm not going to be limited. I'm not going to be limited by people's advice that, like, I have to choose the right thing because if I don't make the right decision, everything's going to go downhill. It's not going to go downhill. So let's not be like catastrophic about it. Let's just make sure that we're choosing something that feels right for us at this particular moment in time. Okay, that was very philosophical and abstract, and I'm sure the sociologist student is like, can you get to the concrete, like, facts of what I can actually do? Okay, so again, what I would say is pay attention to what it is you actually enjoy about sociology or what you enjoy about any of your classes, quite frankly. Is it that you really enjoy people? Is it that you really enjoy new cultures? Is it what is it actually that really entices you about what it is you're learning or you're doing? Because that could lead you down a number of different paths, right? If you really enjoy people, you could potentially look at a whole bunch of different functions within HR where you're working with people. You could look at learning and development. You could look at leadership development programs. You could look at HRBP roles, that stands for HR business partners. You could look at talent recruiting. Those all have lots of people functions. Honestly, another thing is maybe you're a sociologist that really enjoyed your stats class and you're actually really good at numbers and data. And so you're like, you know what? Actually, I'm really interested in people, but I really love that piece. Maybe I want to go into business operations. Every corporation has biz ops, right? Or maybe I really love people and I love persuading people around an idea. Maybe you're interested in sales or you like seeing people be successful. You could go into a success function. These are all possibilities of what you could do. It really just comes down to what it is you enjoy doing and how you want to apply that particular knowledge. So I would sit down, think about what those things are that you actually enjoy. And then you can go again, you could go to your career center. You could say, look, this is what I'm majoring in. This is what I really enjoy around that. Can you help me match up? What are some different types of job functions or roles that would potentially be available to me that I could go do more research on? That's always an option. You could also do some of that yourself before going in to see someone. And you could literally put that into like a chat GPT, for example, and say, give me 10 types of job functions that seem to match these interest areas. And you could take that list and you could start doing research. And once you've narrowed that down a little bit, you could then go to see an advisor and say, okay, I've done a little bit of research. This is what I've learned so far. I think I might want to explore these 3 or 4 or 5 areas. Can you give me more resources or more people that I should talk to? You could also use Handshake to then go do a people search and find more people to connect with. These are all options for concrete things you can do between like now and Christmas break, winter break, to really start to like dive in and see. And then what I would do is I would like keep a little journal or just a notebook every time you meet with someone in one of these functional areas and you're learning from them. Pay attention to your energy level. Do you seem engaged? Do you want to keep asking them more questions? Are you so curious that like you don't want the conversation to end? That's a good sign that this is perhaps something. Go talk to a second person, a third person. It's a good sign that there might be something there for you to keep digging into. If you're like, wow, this is a nice person, but I'm really bored with the conversation, then that's like another sign, probably not the area that you want to go into, right? But part of that is also like listening to yourself and understanding your own personal reaction to that.
I
That
love
was a
that
long answer,
insight.
but I hope that's helpful.
No, I think it's great, and I think it speaks to a lot of the questions that I'm seeing. We have quite a few questions around deciding a path and figuring out values alignment in your career. And so I think this was a really great comprehensive answer that answers a lot of those. I have another question that kind of illustrates a common theme that I'm seeing, which is translating service industry or maybe like less related professional experience skills into more of a corporate space. So this person is a communications major who has only ever had a serving job, who's interested in getting into sales. Can you talk a little bit about like how to make those connections and maybe how to market yourself in sales if perhaps you only have a service industry job background?
Yes, yes, 100%. Okay, so what you're really going to be highlighting for yourself here is your ability to talk to literally anyone, your ability to manage, quite frankly, a tough, fast-paced environment. You're probably also dealing with people who are sometimes disgruntled about their meal, about how warm it is, about getting the wrong order, so on and so forth, right? That's essentially objection handling in sales, right? And so you're just looking for the comparison points of like, okay, in sales, I need to be able to be persuasive. I need to be able to be to go up to anyone. I need to be able to make a value proposition case around the product or the service that I'm selling, right? In some ways, it's not that different than what you're doing as a server, right? You're convincing them that this is like a great option for them to order. Why is it a great option? You're essentially often upselling when you're trying to get them to take dessert, right? Like there are a lot of similarities. And so it's just a matter of wording those pieces in there. I would not shy away from the fact that you have had service jobs. I actually find that a lot of employers love folks that have had service jobs because to them it really speaks to like your grit, your persistence. There's nothing harder than a service job. There really isn't. It's hard work. And the fact that you've done it and you've done it well allows you to be able to highlight that. If you also happen to be like an assistant manager or a manager, and you're also managing a staff or a team of folks, you could also touch on those pieces or some of your organizational pieces because maybe you're deciding work schedules and shifts and things like that. So you could always incorporate that piece in as well. Um, if there is different restaurants function a little bit differently, but sometimes there's like a quota or goal of like what the restaurant is trying to hit in terms of like turnover of tables in order to hit revenue for the week or the month. So if you have both insight in that and can also speak to that in terms of your contribution to that, that's another way to kind of draw a connection to the notion of like targets and quota and hitting goal in the sales function as well.
I love it. Okay, I have a question that has a flip side because I have like one case and another case that are kind of opposite of one another. So I'm going to pose one to you first.
Okay.
We have a couple of folks in the chat who have advanced degrees, whether it be an MBA or somebody who's pursuing a master's level degree and are looking for ways to leverage their academic background to make up for a lack of formal full-time work experience in the job search. Maybe
Mm.
in pursuit of that advanced degree, they didn't take a full-time job and instead they worked part-time. Can you talk a little bit about leveraging your academic background with an advanced degree in the job search?
Yeah. So if you have an advanced degree, so there's a difference between going straight through from undergrad to straight into grad, essentially not having worked full time during that entire period, and then going into a job versus you went to undergrad, you worked, you came back to go to school, and then now you're trying to either pivot or launch off from your grad program. The reason I note those as slightly different is because depending on the industry, you should just manage your expectations around sort of like what type of role you might go into. I'm going to actually use a master's program that maybe nobody is thinking about except for me at this particular moment in time, but like journalism. Okay. So if let's say Brinton graduated from undergrad, went straight into journalism in some way, shape, or form. I did undergrad at the same time, but then I went into a master's program in journalism and then came out. Brinton and I might actually be looking at slightly different types of positions, even though we're essentially like same year and I got an advanced degree and she didn't. Because in the field of journalism, people value the hands-on experience so much that Brinton may actually still be slightly ahead of me in the types of roles that I might be able to get, even though I have a master's degree, because I don't have as much of that hands-on experience. So that's actually something to really think about when you're thinking about whether or not you want to get your master's, is like, what's the purpose of getting the master's? Is it to advance? Is it to give you more knowledge? Is it because you are pivoting from another field or area and this gives you a way to kind of like officially make that change? Those are all good reasons, but just like manage your expectations around some of those pieces. The other thing that I would really recommend is often graduate programs, again, also have career services that can help you and will have connections to a lot of employers, many of whom are already on Handshake as well, that can help get you connected through the programs and the workshops and all of the events that they're hosting. So make sure you're taking advantage of those pieces, because you're going to want to make sure that you're building those relationships with those employers through those opportunities, because again, you're trying to build enough credibility that somebody would want to take a chance on you, even if you don't have the hands-on work experience just yet. You can also use your coursework, especially if you're a grad student. You likely will have a lot of relevant coursework or projects that you should be and can be highlighting. And so that should very much go on your Handshake profile. It should be in your resume. You should be talking about those in your interview. Those are also still hands-on experiences, even if you're not getting paid. And or if there are volunteer opportunities that you can take advantage of, that's another way that you could also think about using your advanced degree as a way to like launch off into whatever new thing you're trying to do.
Amazing. And I think we have time for one more question that I think is kind of similar yet different to this question, which is somebody who is wondering how to stand out and compete with university graduates when they are a community college alumni in the job application process. Do you have any, also alumni is plural. I rephrased their question and then I used the wrong word, alumnus. Do you have any recommendations for somebody who, graduated from community college and is in the job market and feeling a little bit overwhelmed when it comes to standing out against others who have graduated from a university?
Yeah. So first of all, don't be discouraged. We're seeing here at Handshake, we're seeing more and more employers who are very open to hiring 2-year graduates in addition to 4-year graduates. So I don't shy away from being proud of that. That's an amazing accomplishment as well. There are a few things that I think you can do. One, I would highlight again, the skills that you have, whether that's coming from your coursework or coming from any previous work experience. I find that a lot of the 2-year students that I've worked with in the past are often working part-time or sometimes full-time while they're going to school. So like use that to your advantage. Make sure you talk about that, especially if you have full-time work experience, even while you're juggling school. That is a great thing to be able to talk about. It shows your time management. It shows your grit. One of the things that I've often heard from employers a lot is like, we want students who have actually been in the work world, whether it's a service job or quite frankly, any job, just because it shows that they understand how to work with a boss. They understand how to work with a team. They understand showing up on time, right? Like these are some of the things that you and I might think are really basic, but quite frankly, is still a great thing for you to be able to highlight and showcase your grit and your perseverance. So I would highlight your skills. I would highlight some of the experience that you've had. Don't shy away from talking about some of the time management and what you've had to juggle to get to where you are right now. If you're literally able to like start right away, make sure that that's very clear too. Those are all things that can be useful as well. And then if you're actually looking in your like local regional area, that also sometimes is a benefit as well, since sometimes the 4-year students are looking to go to some of the other major cities. So just another thing to keep in mind if you're looking at like overall trends.
I love it. Thank you so much, Christine. And wow, that puts us right on time to wrap up. I couldn't have scripted it better for you. Really appreciate everybody here for all of the questions you submitted. I know we didn't get the chance to answer everything, but please know that we're going to continue doing this series. We have another version of Office Hours that we will be sharing out that's happening in November with Christine. So if you have additional questions, we will make sure to share that link in some of our follow-up comms from this event. In the meantime, thank you so much for your time and attention today. This has been such a delight. And Christine, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us all. There's a quick survey in the chat for anybody who wants to leave us some feedback about what you'd like to see more of in our future student events. And with that, I hope you all have a great rest of your week. Thank you so much for being here. Bye.
Awesome. Thanks,
Thank
Brenton.
you.